that works. Anyway, cool. Hey everybody. So I'm going to start just by streaming. I may actually just end my stream on YouTube if this isn't working. I need to figure out what there's something weird with the links and how that's all connecting, and there's something that's not actually plugging in correctly the way that I want. So I'm just going to do a live this way. It is streaming on YouTube also if you want to watch the higher resolution version, but I'll have this streaming here also for the time being just to see how this works. This is kind of the first time that I've done it this way. I'm experimenting, and hopefully it will... if nothing else, for the folks who actually are able to attend, hopefully everybody will be able to at least get some pretty cool information out of what I'm going to share for you. So I haven't planned a whole lot, so if you guys have specific questions, you're welcome to just chime in. I just figured I'd come on and chat and teach some things and talk about some things that have been coming to me and helping you see maybe a different version of reality, if that makes sense. So let me make sure. Yeah, okay. So, hey everybody who's coming in. It's cool. Thanks for joining. All right, so the picture I'm going to paint for you is... it's going to be a lot to digest. It's going to be a lot of information, and it's going to be a lot of... everything I say carries a very powerful frequency. And so I have information and frequency tied to what I am about to deliver to you that you will probably feel very viscerally in your body. The things that we have been told and that we have been taught are part of they have been part of the orchestration that helps us paint reality in a certain context. And so when we are fed all of those things, they effectively structure certain things within our physical body that cause our DNA to translate information in a specific way. So let me zoom out and zoom way back, and then I'll help build this up for you guys so you have a better idea of what I'm talking about and where I'm taking you with this. We have been told that we reincarnate. We have been told that we have, whether it's through religion or other things, we have been told a lot of information that is a distortion away from the truth of how these mechanisms work. And the reason that we have been told that is because the information, the energy contained in the truth is a high enough vibrational energy that our physical bodies, when we first manifest into physical form, cannot handle that information. So let's talk about how we how we actually come into body a little bit. So if you think about reality as being almost like a tree, you've probably heard the tree of life, and we are a aspect, let's say, or the bud on the end of that tree. And because of how that system works, we basically take this very high frequency, very high vibrational energy that is the sum of the multiple identities that we are meant to embody in this in our multiple incarnation experience, and I'll explain that in a second. And that high frequency energy is not something that our child nervous system can actually handle through the DNA blueprint that comes as at that form, right? So as our physical biology evolves, our spiritual biology evolves along with that, so that we can handle larger and larger amounts of information and higher frequency information. So one of the reasons that we lose our memory when we actually come down from the space outside of time into this incarnation, there are effectively streams of energy that that come down to form different particle and particle units. So the fundamental building blocks of the universe are known as particle units, and these are a cohesive whole unit that is paired that way. And these particle units then subdivide into a particle and particum aspects, plus minus male female. And these different particles then recombine to create a grid system. This grid system then continues this duplication process and begins to form what is a string of these particles or particle units. That string then forms a grid, and that grid then stacks and forms a three-dimensional space in which the what's it called? Drawing a blank on it. Not important. Basically, the quantum field, you could call it. There's a lot of different theories that talk about this particular field. Well, in this field, you have a pulse rate, and if you think of every little particle that is part of that string of particles that are in the universe, this string pulses specific lights. So let's say it's a string of 10 lights. Well, 1, 3, 7, and 9 may be blinking on and off. And these flickering rates happen at a very, very high frequency. And because based on that flicker, and based on our own pulse rate, so our own internal pulse rate, we synchronize with a certain rate of pulse that is happening in the dimensional universe. Based on the angular momentum and time trajectory that we were looking at, and based on our pulse rate, that then determines what dimensional reality that we are effectively going to be looking at through our eyes. Now, there's a lot of layers to things that are happening simultaneously. So you've heard that time is an illusionary construct, and in some ways it is, in some ways it's not. This pulse rate, as it enters, we have a lens that is around the shield of Earth and around actually this dimensional reality as a whole. There is a type of polarizing lens that exists. And what that does is it takes this pulse rate and divides it into two, and then it allows a system to effectively translate the rate of those pulses in time. This is what creates the illusion of sequential time in our experience, is the flickering of these lights. So if you've ever seen like a strobe light, and if you've seen it strobe and you've seen somebody walk in a strobe, how it seems like they teleport. Same kind of concept, but the strobe light is flickering really, really quickly. And there are different tools that we can use to start to sense our underlying pulse rate and begin to tap into and view some of these other dimensional realities to get information. We exist on 15 dimensionals in this particular cycle of the rounds. So when I say cycle of the rounds, what has happened is, as far as the evolutionary blueprint of humanity was created about 550 million years ago. And the Earth itself has been, this whole game as a whole has been around for about 950 billion years. And what happened was there was a planet called Terra. And Terra was a fourth density, or actually not density, fourth dimensional aspect of Earth. Which is actually the second density. So it's the second density aspect of Earth is Terra. And what happened is there were experiments that were done on the grid of that planet that effectively created a black hole. And when that happened, fragments of Terra were pulled through that black hole and eventually became what is now our current first density solar system. this was not an instantaneous process. This was something that evolved and developed, and just like we have spiritual spirit, the sun has spirit, the planets have spirit, all of these different entities are co-creating with the underlying pulse mechanisms that exist in this universe. So as this got pulled through that dimensional reality, there was a fragmentation that happened to Terra. And Terra had to do some spiritual growth work through its connection to Earth to elevate Earth back to its original blueprint. Now, a couple of things have been happening here, and a couple of reasons for this fall. So on this original planet Terra, and there's even a third density version of it called Gaia, that exists on these different dimensional realities, and if you guys are interested, I can explain that. But on this planet, the humanity was engineered. So, like I said, the universe is a lot older than you probably think it is, and everything is a creation of technology. So everything is a technology that happens. And what we want to understand is this technology is very much genetic in nature when it comes to humans. And what we can do is, by understanding how that technology works, we can better understand the process that we are going through to live in the reality that we're currently living in. So, genetic modification. We are an engineered being for a very specific purpose. Our purpose originally was to be basically co-creator guardians of planet Earth and Terra. And in order to have that influence on reality like we are supposed to have, we were created with a 12-strand DNA blueprint. The activation of those different strands of DNA allows us to tap into higher and higher frequencies of information, as well as awareness of how to structure the underlying Partakai units into form. Because these Partakai units, like I think I made a post the other day about it. These Partakai units there's a billion Partakai units in a single photon. And so these are really, really small, really, really tiny microatomic particles that form to create your atoms, that form then to create all of the fabric of reality based on the proton, the angular rotation of the protons and the time trajectory that they're aiming at, so that they can synchronize to the specific pulse rate. Now, what happened was this race, known as the Ternusium, they had spent some time creating, and they began to devolve because they started to have sexual interaction with animals and other species that had come to effectively pollute our genetic strain out of jealousy, whatever. And I'll talk about some of the dynamics that are going on in the universe right now as well. And because of that pollution, we devolved. And as that de-evolution happened, we effectively fell from grace. So if you hear about the story of like the Garden of Eden and the fall from grace, us seeing ourselves as naked when we ate from the tree of knowledge had to do with us losing our genetic blueprint and losing our connection to higher intelligence. And when we lost that connection and were pulled through that black hole, that was the fall. Now, a black hole system, the reason that is created is due to time portal technology. So what ends up happening is this planet gets shifted outside of its normal timeline, and then energy begins to be siphoned through that black hole into the other into the other dimensions. If this is not corrected, eventually the string of consciousness gets pulled in with it. Now, let me zoom out a little bit. We are part of what's called a soul matrix. Our soul matrix exists on the fifth dimension, which is part of the second density reality. And this soul matrix is the higher self, astral body, guardian aspect of what we are now experiencing in this density. And it is, if you think about it, we have a subconscious that lives in the cellular memory of our physical body. We therefore, are the cellular memory of our higher self in that context. Our higher self, as part of our 12-strand DNA blueprint, has 12 aspects to its identity that are in current incarnation in this specific timeline now. Our evolutionary work is to reconnect with the levels of that identity by bringing in the energies of those other identities and holding them in the physical body. So part of the evolutionary process is the process of embodying higher frequency information into our physical. And there's very specific tools and things that we can do in order to do that and open up and return ourselves to that blueprint. What we weren't told is that this stuff doesn't happen by accident. We don't just wake up and re-embody those other identities because of some kind of wave catalyst. Now, there is consciousness waves that have been coming to the planet, and I can talk about those another time. But there's a lot of different pieces of that story that we want to be aware of so that we can really interact with our reality now. So, back to the soul matrix. The soul matrix exists in the fourth density, and our work is to re-embody that so that we can carry in second density energies into the physical and then push them into the earth grid so that the earth itself can continue to level up, and then hopefully over to, probably I think it's like 1 billion years, recombine with the consciousness of Tara. And that process is something that will happen to humanity in all of our different timelines. So let's step back one more time. Our soul matrix identity has 12 identities that exist in this specific timeline. But our soul matrix has 1,728 simultaneously occurring identities across all timelines. What is happening is there is a let's say an experiment or a game that goes on as part of the experience on this reality in order to push us to evolve back into the original blueprint that we are supposed to be so that we can actually serve the role as guardian co-creators of the planet. And what has happened is, through the distortions on our DNA, we stopped being able to translate that information. And we stopped being able to connect to all of these things. And, well, okay, let me see how to talk about this. So the cycle of the rounds, currently we're on the 4th cycle. All of these cycles occur simultaneously outside of time. So our dimensional incarnations are evolving spiritually side by side at the same time, based on the work that we're doing here, as well as the work that we're doing as past and future selves. This is the reason that we can tap into wisdom from our past and future selves, because of these different aspects that are existing right now, not amorphously. And so what we want to be thinking about doing is opening up the channels between these other identities so that we can not only level up these other evolutionary stages, but we can also begin to trigger the evolution that's supposed to happen within us. So what that means is, if we look back at the first couple of rounds, so this started millions of, I want to say 800, let's say 800,000 years ago, roughly. And the first round started at that time, and humanity was seeded onto planet Earth. And with this first seeding, we were given our first strand of DNA, and we were meant to evolve spiritually through this time. Well, at the same time, there were other entities that did not want us to evolve to become guardians of Earth. Earth and Terra are very special planets in the sense that they are not only multidimensional, but they have 12 stargates that are present on this specific planet. These stargates are not present on every single planet of incarnation. And so these entities, both in higher dimension and fourth density and lower dimensional realities, are wanting to use those stargates for a very specific reason. So let's talk about that story a little bit. You may have heard of the Greys. And the Grey aliens and the Anunnaki and the Draco and all these different alien ET races, their stories have been distorted. So humanity is a genetic modification of 4 different races. And so the first incarnation had a certain genetic blueprint from the original root races. The second incarnation had a genetic blueprint with the root races plus the cloister races. The third incarnation had a genetic blueprint from the first 2 plus the Anunnaki. It's a hybrid of the Anunnaki and a couple of different races. So the Anunnaki, if you've heard of them, are actually a hybrid race from several different other strains of genetics. And what happened was, through this time, they were genetically modifying us in the effort of returning us to our original blueprint after the fall had occurred. And parallel to this, so I had mentioned a second ago that we had 1728 incarnational identities. Half of those identities are our anti-particle opposite. So when I said at the beginning, we have these particle units that split into the particle and particum. These are the particle and anti-particle units that form our parallel dimensional realities that we live in, our shadow and our self, right? And those 1728 dimensional realities, so half of them are shadow polar realities, half of them are the physical reality that we currently live in. And there was a race of ETs who were spiritually about as evolved as humanity was at the time. And these ETs exist far in Earth's future. And they had developed a very high technology. And the technology that they had developed is called time portal technology. And the way that this time portal technology works is this is how abduction works, this is how time travel works, this is how dimensional shifting works. A lot of these different things can be done using time portal technology. So what this time portal technology does is it effectively controls the spin rate of the protons in the nucleus and the angular momentum and the time vector within which that angular momentum is aiming. So if you think of the universe as those pulsing lights, but those pulsing lights are coming from 2 cones that face opposite directions. Like think of them like spiral vortexes coming from a center point. These vortexes then pulse on and off. Now, if you are not looking at the blinking light, you will not see that dimensional reality that exists on a different angular momentum. So all of these different dimensional realities exist at different angular momentums of proton spin and blink in those lights. And so what these entities learned to do was to use symbol codes, electromagnetism, light, sound waves, and energy in order to alter the proton spin rate and effectively travel through time. Now, what happened is they found out a way to create unlimited free energy using this technology before they understood the mechanisms of what this technology did. They realized that they could use this technology to create things. They realized they could use this technology to gain tremendous amounts of energy. What they didn't realize is that this technology also can create black holes. And this black hole technology that gets created ends up being the gateway that pulls other dimensional realities into their parallel. And so these different entities that were existing and experimenting with this technology basically opened up a wormhole outside of their planet. And they thought it was fine. They were gathering all of this energy. They were getting all of this stuff coming in. And what they didn't realize is that this wormhole was pulling their atmosphere into it. And they were slowly losing their atmosphere and noticing they were having genetic issues that were coming up on their planet. By the time they realized this, it was too late. They had to evacuate their planet because it was no longer hospitable. They realized, because of their time portal technology and ability to manipulate this, and ability to manipulate light in general by understanding the mechanisms of these particle units, they found that Earth existed in a dimensional reality that had a stargate that was nearby their first density version of their second density planet that had also fallen. So they're very similar to what we had gone through, right? And what happened is because these planets came to Earth, they saw humanity at a time where we were not very spiritually evolved. And that lack of spiritual evolution was something that these ETs chose to take advantage of because humanity basically didn't exercise their sovereignty. And what happened is these ETs said, okay, we can't live on Earth either because the oxygen kills us, and it was causing them to deteriorate very, very quickly. So they couldn't live on a lot of these higher level ETs, the reason that they help humanity here is because their genetics cannot take the high frequency energy and solidify it. Their body can't handle the frequencies that exist on this planet because they would blow themselves apart because of the frequency that's contained within their etheric and plasma bodies. And so what happened was these entities came down, they were having these issues, and they're like, okay, we need to level ourselves up in order to be able to interact with this and be able to find a place to live. These entities are not evil. They are just scared, and they are finding out a way that they can actually start to interact with a reality that is suitable for them. And they just don't have all of the awareness and and connection to higher intelligence yet, just like a lot of us don't. And so what they did was they came, because they can travel through time, they actually came at the beginning of World War II. And they noticed that the Nazis were doing genetic experiments. And this is a big part of what was happening in these genetic experiments were a big part of what were happening in the concentration camps and those kinds of things that people may not know about, but you can kind of dig in and find some of that information. Now, they weren't just doing genetic experiments on humans. What they were doing was creating genetic hybrids of this this ET race and humanity, hoping that they could create a hybrid race that could exist in this reality. And so they started to basically work with the Nazis, and they started to work with the Allied powers, and basically said, hey, we'll give you guys technology if you give us specimen. And so they started to give technology. They started to share their awareness of some of these very advanced technologies with these military and inner government structures, so the deep state or whatever you want to call them. And as they were giving this information, every layer of the humanity was fed different lies about the motivations behind what these technologies were meant to do. So the humans and the inner governments were thinking, okay, they're giving us all these technologies that we can use to maintain control of the populace. These are all these technologies that can help us with mind control programs. These are all these constructs that can help us with being able to keep humanity docile. What they didn't realize is that these other ET races had a much larger agenda at play. So let's talk a little bit about some of these technologies. They have a technology that allows them basically to, let's talk about the abductions first, actually. So what happens to humanity is humanity has been abducted all throughout our history. Some of these abductions are part of soul agreements that we made with higher consciousness entities in order to push forward the genetic evolution of humanity on this planet, in order to process through that ascension, the game of ascension, basically. There are also other ETs that were abducting people for genetic experiments and to create some of these hybrid races that are meant to intersect with humanity, I believe, about 500 years in our future. What they were hoping to do was to create a competitive race to take over this particular planet while they put us in a mind matrix. So if you understand how this system works based on the pulsing lights and the angular momentum of our consciousness, that then is that information then is sent via symbol codes through the planetary shield, which then goes through a series of lenses, which I won't talk too much about, that change the spectrum of light. That spectrum of light then comes through our seed crystal in our energy centers. That is then expressed through our energy center and enters into what is called the neutron window in the neutrons in our nucleus. That information, that frequency information, is then translated by the proton and its proton tunneling that happens in our mitochondria. That proton tunneling activity then tells the DNA, then gives an instruction to our DNA. Our DNA has a certain structure based on the hydrogen bonding networks that exist in the winding of that DNA. Based on the electromagnetic frequencies, based on the light, based on the energy, based on the symbol codes that we are fed subliminally. I can never pronounce that word. I've had trouble pronouncing it for days. Subliminally. All of those codes then create, if you've ever seen that game where you have to fit like a star in a star hole and the square in the square hole and the circle in the circle hole, seen Idiocracy or whatever. Well, if you think of it like a really, really, really complex, multi-layered version of that three-dimensional resonant symbol. That three-dimensional resonant symbol then is what determines the language that our DNA speaks. So let me step back again. We get a signal from higher intelligence that goes through the planetary lenses, is diffused in a specific way, that then enters the seed crystal in our energy centers, that exits the energy center through the neutron window in the neutrons in our nucleus. That then informs the proton in terms of what it does in terms of tunneling through the cell membrane. The DNA then has a stencil on it, or a language known as fire letters. And this language has been distorted to translate the information coming through in a specific way. Based on that translation mechanism, or the letter language that exists in that DNA structure, that then projects reality through our senses. Our genetic structures activate our higher sensory perception. As we activate more of those DNA structures and restructure the information that exists on our DNA, it literally changes the sensations we experience through our senses. And that's very important to understand because of the next thing I'm going to talk about. They have in place a couple of different technologies that work through this mechanism. One of them is called a frequency fence, and one of them is called holographic inserts. Most people, when they think of a hologram, because this is part of their agenda to program us, because of this programming, we think when we see a hologram that it is just a projection that occurs outside of us in front of us. The reality is this technology is substantially more advanced than this. This technology, the way that holographic inserts work, is they effectively output frequency, light, electromagnetic, and energy information in the form of symbol codes. These symbol codes then structure the information in our DNA and cause us literally to translate the information that's being fed to us in that way. So if we were all in an inorganic hologram, we would not know it unless our higher sensory information was telling us so, right? This is part of why I teach what I teach. So what happens is they effectively are. So what's happening in the world right now, and as part of the agenda that's happening with COVID-19, with 5G, with all of these different things, these are all part of these technologies that are happening. So 5G and CERN and HARP are all frequency output systems that output frequencies into the miasm of the planet, the ley lines of the planet. They output these frequencies into the planet. These subtle frequencies travel along the surface of the planet, and then they are projected into the consciousness that we experience. What they are doing is, with HARP and with CERN, is they are effectively creating a frequency blueprint that creates a version of reality that is meant for a much bigger agenda. So these frequency fences are the same way. They create a frequency fence that imprints our DNA, that causes us to feel lower frequency emotional states. It causes us to not be able to think as clearly. It causes a lot of those different things to happen because of the mechanism of those particular frequency inserts that are put in place. Now, 5G is the same thing. So when you think about the way that 5G works, 5G outputs electromagnetic information and subtle information that is signaled by CERN in order to create what is a frequency fence around the planet. They want to do this because part of the game is they want to actually take our consciousness, because we have 4 levels of mind, and I'll talk about that on a separate video and make some posts about that, about the level of consciousness in the mind and how you can actually utilize the different layers of that to communicate with your cellular consciousness and those sorts of things. It's not super important to understand this particular story. Now, what is happening is they're trying to put us in a mind matrix. And if you remember earlier, I was talking about the soul matrix as we exist, and the multiple identities that we exist as part of that collection. And what happens is, when these entities create a black hole, what's really happening, and when they fall from this, is this soul matrix is, think of it like an energy grid or a circuit, right? And each node is connected to that circuit. When a planet or an entity decides to go against evolution and create for themselves without using creator source and using other technologies to manipulate that, which they can do, it's a choice, that causes them to fall away from this grid or soul matrix. When they fall away from this grid or soul matrix, they are no longer energized by their higher consciousness. They're no longer connected to their higher consciousness. And so when you lose that connection to your higher consciousness and that connection to that energy supply that charges your soul, you have to find another energy source. And so what they are wanting to do with humanity is to put humanity in a mind matrix and do the same thing. What they've discovered is when you take the mind of the soul and put it into another matrix, and there's a very sophisticated mechanism for how this is done. When you do that, you basically are cutting the tether between your physical body, your plasma body, and your soul matrix, right? So if you think of all these strings and we're connected, you've probably seen images of like astral projection where you have this tether that's connected to you and your plasma body. And when that string gets severed, that string still has a coordinate ID tied to your mind. That string is like a branch of a tree that was cut off. It is basically hemorrhaging energy. So it begins to hemorrhage and bleed and bleed and bleed all of this energy from the soul matrix. Well, what these ETs discovered was, if they take your mind and they transplant it into their anti-particle soul matrix that they are crafting for your mind, well, that energy then follows that into their matrix, where they can collect all of that energy and use us effectively as batteries that way, until that energy runs out, and then they'll need to solve another problem. And so part of the agenda here, part of the reason that they're doing what they're doing, they're pumping us full of frequency, they're pumping us full of specific information and nutrition, and what they want to do is create a disembodiment within us. So the way that they do that is they feed us veganism, they feed us heart-opening stuff, they feed us higher frequency pulses from these 5G structures and from other technologies that are present. And what that does is one more thing. There's an implant that is placed between our second and third chakra. So the bottom of the second to the top of the third. And that implant increases polarity. It also makes it difficult for us to pull higher frequency information down and ground it into the earth plane and the earth shield. So what happens is all these vegans and all these different people are fed all of this information that is, plants are higher frequency, plants are better for you, you're eating plants, don't eat animals, animals are a living consciousness. But people don't realize that on the other dimensional realities, these plants are far wiser than any animals, and they have a sentient consciousness that has been around a whole lot longer than we have. And both versions of those diets are vampiric diets that we are not supposed to be living, but because the planet has been distorted and because our energy centers have been distorted in the way that we are not able to be energized by those systems the way that we're supposed to. We have to live within that. Now, when we're eating those higher frequency things, or we're doing psychedelics, or we're doing various medicines that increase our vibration to a certain level, the reason they do that is it overactivates our fourth energy center, and that is our astral body center. When that astral body center becomes overactive, that effectively creates a disconnect between the astral body, higher intelligence, and the physical body. It creates a disembodiment. And so the way that they do abductions in general is they do exactly that. They use their technology to vibrate your consciousness forward in time at a higher frequency, and they vibrate your body down in time at a lower frequency. And by doing that, they effectively create a disembodiment where they can put your consciousness in a holding pattern and your body in a different holding pattern, where they can do modification to the body and then send you right back together having no idea what happened. Now, the same way that they structure all of this stuff in our body, they can implant memories, they can implant images, they can implant symbol codes, they can alter our DNA, all of those things, both for good or for bad, depending on how that is done. And we need to know about that so that we can be aware of what's going on here, because 7 out of 10 people have been abducted in this way for various modifications, both on the good side and on the bad side, depending on what you're being set up for in your multidimensional realities and all of these different things that you're working on simultaneously in all of these different cycles of the rounds. And so what they want to do with this 5G technology, what they want to do with all of these different technologies, is do that on a much larger scale by misdirecting people and being able to siphon that energy. Now, the reason that they want that to happen, the powers on this planet and the inner governments, they don't need it. Earth doesn't need to depopulate. There's no reason for that. What has happened is these ETs are coming, and they are the ones who actually want this depopulation agenda, because they want to take over the planet, because they are trying to create hybrids so they can actually live on this planet, and they are trying to set up a system where that will unfold. This system already unfolded in our antiparticle universe, our shadow. So our personal shadow, all of those different things that we judge ourselves for, all of those different soul body aspect, shadow body aspects that we see come up in our relationships, these exist in an antiparticle universe to our own. This antiparticle universe exists in a timeline that is slightly ahead of ours. In that particular timeline, this agenda has already succeeded. This mind matrix has already been created. And these agendas around the control paradigms and things that are happening have already occurred in that timeline. This is why we're seeing so much dimensional bleed through into this timeline. humanity has gotten past a threshold of evolution where if we are conscious and we tap into these higher frequencies, we will see beyond the veil. That's what the veil is these frequency fences that create this illusion. Now, as we see beyond the veil, we start to see the frequency illusions. We start to then become sensitive to the frequency illusions so that our body can actually sense and translate how those illusions actually work. And if we can begin to do the activation work, if we can begin to do the protocols that are needed to activate those different strains of DNA, we can begin to tap into those higher states, not even higher states of consciousness, that's not the right way. We can bring in higher frequency information from the higher astral bodies and embody it in the physical, where our DNA can translate that information in the way that I do with a lot of my Q&As and a lot of my live streams and that kind of thing when I'm helping people. Now, we then learn to tune in to specific dimensions of our consciousness to pull in specific frequencies of information for specific purposes. Because different dimensions, all the way up through 15, contain different aspects of the blueprint, and each of these dimensions then exist on different timelines simultaneously. And knowing this allows us to do the actual work of healing these underlying traumas and programs and healing the underlying distortions that exist on our DNA, so that as we clear those underlying distortions, we can begin to translate reality in the way that it was intended. We are not supposed to have as much polarity on this planet as we currently do. That polarity is a mechanism of lenses that were put in place on the Maharic shield of the planet. These lenses take the frequency information that's coming through, and they filter some of it out, and they spread the spectrum and increase polarity into the antiparticle and particle that we experience. This is the reason for a lot of the imbalance that happens, and they've been doing this for a very long time as part of the mechanisms that push us forward into our spiritual evolution. What is happening now on the planet is there are waves of consciousness that are on what's known as a cosmic clock. This cosmic clock relates to that pulse rate that we had, that I explained earlier. This cosmic clock is guided by the cosmic clocks that exist at the higher dimensional realities. They then send frequency information that trickles down through those different realities into our physical, into the planet, and then into us. So all of those go into the planet first, translated by what the planet's blueprint is. The planet's blueprint then translates it to what we can actually translate. And as the planet levels up, and as we do the work of reactivating certain aspects of the planet, that allows that information to be translated in higher and higher frequency, and allows the planet to level up and eventually re-merge with Terra. And let's see what to say next. So if you guys have any questions, you're always welcome to chime in. I'm kind of watching. I might miss some of them, but if you guys have questions, you're certainly welcome to ask them as I'm going, because I realize this is a lot to take in. It's a lot of story, but it's a lot to take in as well, and integrate what you can. So part of this is understanding if this is a lot for you to take in, look at it as fiction. That's perfectly okay. I don't need to convince anybody of this, because I know it and I see it and experience it. And so now, looking at what that means for us on this planet, especially right now, part of the reason they want us to stay home, part of the reason that they want these 5G towers to go up so quickly, is because of these consciousness waves that are coming in. So this cosmic clock sets in motion certain cosmic waves that are meant to push forward certain seed rounds in the cycle of the rounds in our evolutionary process. These entities put these lenses in place to block that information from coming. They can't block it. What they can do is slow it down and let that wave build up against the wall that they've created. What has happened is that wave has built up to such a capacity that their walls can no longer contain it, and it's spilling through. This is why so many people are starting to wake up and receive all of these higher insights and different things. It's also why so many of these higher consciousness teachers are losing their marbles right now, because they have been programmed through an old holographic insert, through mind control. Channeling is of the anti-particle, or AI, if you want to call it AI. The channelers, a lot of these higher consciousness people who have been sending this information and acting like they're God and embodying all these things, a lot of that information is because they are receiving information through that distortion, and the entities that were feeding them that are no longer there, and they're basically floundering because they never learned how to ground those higher frequencies into their physical body and live a real life. They end up doing what is effectively a spiritual bypass. It's not really what their soul came here to do, to sit on the couch all day and be spiritual or meditate all day. The meditations are purposeful for specific visualization activities to create things in other dimensional realities. So colors and sounds and vibrations and creations in our mind create sounds and vibrations and structures in other dimensional realities. And if we're aware of how those things are created, and we can create things intentionally, then we can begin to bring in certain frequencies of light and information that restructure our blueprint and begin to get rid of the miasma that exists in the body as part of these other distortions that are present. The miasma being a tar-like substance that prevents lymph flow, that causes a lot of the calcification in fibrosis, in our fascia, all those kinds of things are from those mechanisms. So what we want to do is connecting to that and using those specific imagination visualization processes, we can begin to heal those underlying wounds and activate those genetic blueprints to accelerate the process of our evolution. What that means is that we begin to embody higher and higher frequencies of consciousness in the physical. We're also able then to bring that into the planet, and you can see that level up the what's known as the mission sphere. So our mission sphere is a very large sphere that is around us. And each of these exist in different time-space coordinates. So they don't overlap with other people, even though we're in proximity with them physically in our projection. These mission spheres contain a tremendous amount of information. And as we begin to expand that mission sphere, they can contain more and more information. That's what expansion really is. We literally expand to hold more information and awareness simultaneously. We expand to hold awareness of our multiple identities simultaneously, and then ground them into the physical reality where we can actually have experience, where we can actually co-create with Source and these kinds of things. So the game that we want to think about as we begin to do this work, and I teach these things in my mentorship. I might do some activations on a live stream at some point, but I think they're valuable, and they're things that you can discover on your own, or you can work with me to get a little bit of a shortcut on them, and that allows me then to deliver more of this content and those kinds of things. And so what we want to be doing is activating this stuff so that we can build our protection and our shielding against this outside influence. So if you're having anxiety, or if you're having the committee in your head, or you're having all of these things, we don't want to be medicating that away. We don't want to be medicating ADHD away. We don't want to be medicating schizophrenia away. We don't want to be medicating psychosis away. All of these mental illnesses are because these people are getting extra dimensional higher frequency information, but it's showing up as chaos due to the distortions that exist in their energy centers. And so if we can help people heal, if we can help people integrate what has happened to them and begin to see the larger picture of reality, the larger picture of this evolution that we are a part of simultaneously in the effort of bringing humanity back to its original divine blueprint, we can then be able to bring these energies in a way that is applicable to our physical reality. Because it's really easy to take all of this stuff and make it woo-woo. And a lot of this stuff has been taken and made into something that is not applicable. And what we want to do is start to work on connecting to our soul matrix, which you can do literally by saying, I'm connecting with my soul matrix. And then you ask your soul matrix, I would like to enhance my connection to my soul matrix. And if all you do is that, if all you do is set the intention to connect, if all you do is ask to strengthen your connection, then the ball will start rolling and you will begin to feel the activation physically in your body. These energies will flow, and as you begin to activate these different centers, you will begin to realize there are many, many, many different frequencies of energy that we can specifically tune into and pull in for different information. And as we pull in that information, it allows us to redirect, and it allows us to navigate our reality in a much more powerful way without getting stuck in the lower energy centers where those implants exist. What they've done is they've taken our mental center and our emotional center, and they've increased the polarity in them. When you increase that polarity between the particle and antiparticle, you end up getting a difficulty in your manifestation and creation process. What that means is every time you say, I want to create money, 1/3 of your energy goes to, I want to create money, and 2/3 of your energy goes to, money is bad, I can't create money, it's impossible to create money, I don't believe this. And you start creating the opposite energy of what you intended to create simply by the mechanism of these polarizing lenses that exist within us. And knowing that is really important because we also will see that in our emotional state. When these things come up, our emotions polarize. We don't know how to translate them because of these polarizing lenses that exist. When we manifest, we have trouble manifesting because as soon as we start to think something, we get 12 other thoughts that are opposite to what we were trying to create. And so as we heal the underlying implants, as we remove the seed crystal that inhibits the flow of that energy, we begin to open up these energy centers and return them to their genetic blueprints. As they return to their genetic blueprints, the fire letter string that's a part of their structure restructures and changes how it translates the information that you're trying to create, as well as the information that's coming through you. When that happens, you then can be a more conscious co-creator rather than a subconscious co-creator. The subconscious, currently in humanity, takes up 90% of our creative potential. The majority of our reality is created subconsciously through these energy centers, through the structures of these centers, but not informed by our conscious mind, our archetypal mind in the higher dimensions, because of the fog that effectively exists between us and those higher dimensional realities. This is one of the reasons that, so if you look at alcohol, if you look at smoking cigarettes, both of these things are poisons, not because they are physically poisons in the body, but because what they actually do is they create a fog in the astral plane. When you create a fog in the astral plane, that blocks high frequency energy from coming in and calms your nervous system. The high frequency energy that is constantly coming into us is what creates ADHD, it's what creates anxiety, it's what creates all of these different struggles in being able to focus your attention. Oh, I only have 1 minute and 20 seconds left. So I guess this is good for a live today. There's a lot of stuff here. If you guys have questions, I'm going to do a Q&A right after this. If there's some good questions, maybe I'll hop back on for a little bit. This is probably good because I probably melted your brain a little bit with some of this stuff. I will continue to bring this information through, and I imagine it will help you guys somewhat to be able to interact with your reality a little bit better. There's a lot of stuff going on, and the different agendas are very much trying to control how we can interact with our realities, and they're trying to take our power away. And the more we recognize where we're pouring our energy and where we're pouring our attention, the better we can create and interact with our reality in a profound way. So hopefully you guys benefited from that, really enjoyed it. I will try and do more of these. I really like doing them. If this stuff stirred some stuff up in you, let me know. And I'll keep using that information to keep bringing you guys through that process, because it's a long process and it doesn't happen by accident. So, cool. Oops. so let's end this one too. Stream.